So we know we're getting something, which is good. So next, what we do is we're going to get this data and transform that into a JSON. Okay, so the way to do this is I'm going to say const, put that in a res variable, and I'm going to use await, and I'm going to say data and then .json. Okay, I'm going to say log, so console.log, and I'm going to say result, and then let's just say res to see what will happen. I'm going to save this. So now I'm going to go ahead and say get my puppy, or get me a puppy. And of course, we need to right click anywhere there, and you can see, you can't quite see it, but inspect, go to inspect, and voila, and I'll click there until we find console. Okay, to see the console. Now we can see this object here. Let me go ahead and clear that again so we can see everything. Click, okay. So we see result, so this is what's being logged out, and we have the res, which now is the data.json. So we have a JSON object we can look for. Now, you can see now things are different. So we have result, we have this message, okay, which has this, indeed, link. It is this object that we have inside here. We have this message, and then we have this link, which is indeed what we want, the link that contains the image to the puppy, okay? And of course, the status, and is the status here. All right, so now we have that information, okay? So we consoled it out. We can see that we are consuming the correct data. Now, the question is, how do I then get that information? Well, first of all, from here, I can go ahead and say dot get the message, right? But that is the field. If I say res, this object, JSON object, message, then I'm going to run again. You can see now that I have this result, which is indeed this link. Let me go ahead and clear that and do it again. Okay, now we can see that we have this link here. Okay, if you click, it's going to go ahead and take me to the actual picture. So each time I click here, I'm going to get a new one. If I click, voila, I can get a different image. All right, so this is indeed working. Now the question is, okay, now that I know that I'm getting the right information, how do I then populate here to create some sort of an image tag so that each time that we say get me a puppy, we are going to get this image from get link, I should say, and then populate and show that image of the puppy. We need to find a way to get this information that we're getting here, the actual message, which is the URL, and then pass it around down here to what we potentially will have is an image tag here where we can pass the source, which is going to be the URL. So if I copy this URL here real quick here, I'm going to just copy all of this and come here, and I have the image tag here. I'm going to paste that in. Voila, you can see that image is showing, right, of the puppy. So I did this by getting the link from our API. Okay, so that works. But that's not what we want to do. We want to be able to, when we say get random dog, we're going to get that res object, in this case, the JSON object, and probe in to get the message, which is the URL that you see here, and then be able to pass it through and dynamically put it in an image tag there to show that image. Right? So that is what we need to do. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to go back, Control Z. In this case here, we want to be able to say something similar like this. I'm going to put inside of curly braces to say we're going to change the modes here to JavaScript. Now, remember, it doesn't have to make sense right now. We'll talk about all of this throughout this course. So this is just an overview of how to put together simply a web app using React. Okay. So what we need to do here is we need to pass the actual information. So we need to be able to say res.message and then, of course, get that information. Of course, this is going to give us an error because it doesn't know what this res is. How do we get all of that to work? All right. So I'm going to get rid of that first real quick here so we can have all of this showing. So in order for us to be able to pass variables that contain state, because that is the idea. When we click get me a puppy, we want to be able to fetch the data, which we did, and then pass that state or pass that trigger to say, okay, we got the data. Now there's a variable that's going to be controlling that data, which is this data we get here, which will contain the URL, and then we're going to pass it along to where everything is being rendered here. Okay, To do so, we have to get a state. So what that means is inside of our function app here, I'm going to create a state. Again, we'll look into state with a lot more details later. But just think of a state as variables that we can attach state to it that will trigger the re-rendering of this entire page as data changes. That's all what's happening. Okay, so how do we do that? We'll say const, and I'm going to put an array here to say image, and then set image. And this is going to be a use state hook. Now, we don't know what that is. You can see the moment I do that, something was imported. You see the use state hook was imported from React. Okay, so essentially I'm creating a state here that we can use to set up this image, which is going to be a variable, and the set image is going to be a function that will set an image. In this case, it's going to set the image to the URL that we are getting here. So when we do that, then this is going to be available, this image here is going to be available anywhere here for us to grab it and then show that image. Oh, very cool. So now that means if I come here and put the image tag again, let's go back and say image, img, I guess. Okay, there we go. And then here to get this, what I will need to do then is I need to call the image. So I'm going to just go ahead and say, put that inside of curly braces and say image. Is that going to work? Let's see. I'm going to save this, run. Nothing is working. Nothing is showing. Okay, what's happening? Well, nothing is showing. The reason being is because this image is empty. It doesn't have anything yet. Because we need to actually set the link, the URL to the image, right? This URL image here, whenever this is clicked. And at this point here, we just have a state that is empty, doesn't have anything. So this image variable doesn't have anything. That's why we don't receive an error or anything, but nothing is showing because, well, the image is empty, right? The image variable. So that means then we want that to happen, to set the image to be called the moment that we have an actual image. And that happens where? Well, that happens once inside of our get random. Indeed, at the bottom here, I can just call this set image, and then I'm going to just pass, well, res, like that. Well, what is res? Well, res, we know it's an object that contains, in this case, the actual field message, which contains the URL, which is exactly what we need. So now I can just get rid of that. And so I'm setting this image, in this case, it's going to be an object, to this payload here. Okay, so now I have access to this, but this is not going to work, as you will see, because this image here is going to be what? This whole payload. So that means then I will have to go and say something like this: image.message. Okay, so now if I say click, and voila, you can see I'm getting an image. How cool is that, right? Again, and there we go. We can see another image. And I get me a puppy again, and there we go. And of course, things are not styled nicely, but that's okay. That's not the point. The point is that this is working. All right, and there you have it. Okay, and there you have it. So just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we're able to use a foreign API that we found online somewhere and create a very simple application that when we click a button, we are able to fetch the payload that we get from this API, extract the correct field that we want. In this case, we just want this field, which contains a URL to our, and then show that image on click at the bottom here. There we go. And this is the power of React. Now, it took me a little bit here because I was just like trying to explain the dynamics of what's happened here. Again, if this makes no sense, no worries. I don't expect you to know anything for that matter. I just wanted to show you what is possible with React.js. Just in a few minutes, we're able to fetch random images from an API. On a click of a button, we get all those random images that are shown on our web app. So this is actually a web app that is working using React. Okay, there we go. So I hope this is getting you excited to learn React. And I'm excited to teach you about React and the things that we can do to build amazing front-end user interfaces. Okay, so this is just the beginning. Don't stress if this makes no sense, because we're going to demystify all of this and much more in this course.